we lead with so much fear about stuff. And I think that that doesn't help anybody at all to process any situation. And I also grew up in a household. My father was, 100% German and very German. He was born 1915. He was 50 when I was born. So you were not supposed to have an attitude. You were not supposed to cry. I was a crybaby because I was
Yeah.
very sensitive.
Yeah.
And so I was told, you got to manage your temper. You can't do this. You can't do that. You got to be strong. You got to take care of your mom. Your mom's sick. You got to
Hmm.
take care of your siblings. You're the eldest daughter. And so I was also taught I got to stuff those feelings.
Hmm.
And I'm meanwhile in this house of extroverts who are loud. And I just wanted to be quiet so I could figure out what was going on inside of myself.
Yeah.
So very early on, also, I learned I had to stuff things.
Hmm.
Couldn't talk about it. There was going to be shame about that. And so, what ended up happening then, as I got older and really started seeing how that stuff would come out inappropriately, because that's what happens when you stuff something. But I would have all this pent up anger and resentment. It would come out at the worst times because I wasn't dealing with it. Wasn't dealing with it. And when I started working with tarot and doing all kinds of other things to start dealing with that anger, number one, I started feeling a lot better,
Hmm.
and I felt like my life became more honest,
Hmm.
and I was able to process things faster and better. Sure. Well, tarot, first of all, is 78 paper cards. Let's just start right there. They have images that are, archetypal images
Hmm.
of our journey here
Yeah.
on the planet and also our day to day activities. And anybody can look at those cards like a picture book and they can kind of get a feel for what that's trying to say.
Yeah.
And how tarot works as a reader comes up with a question, or a querent. Querent is the person who's getting the reading. We shuffle the cards and then we lay them out in patterns called spreads and look at the story that's unfolding. And the whole goal for readings is to help you see where you are right now and where you're heading, and maybe if there's a better path.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're sitting down with a brand new guest. Her name is Theresa Reed, also known as the Tarot Lady on Instagram. She's written a number of books and she's dropped by today to talk to us about her newest one, The Cards You're Dealt, How to Deal When Life Gets Real. And so Theresa, welcome to the fun. Thanks so much for making time for me and our listeners.
Hey, Glenn, thank you so much for having me today. I am excited to talk to you.
Thank you. So, first things first, for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with you, your Instagram page, things like that, and your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And who are you? What do you do? What's your Starbucks order? Tell us what we need to know.
Oh, thank you. My name is Theresa Reed. I'm better known as the Tarot Lady. I am the author of multiple books. I've been reading tarot and astrology charts for over 40 years. I no longer read for the public because I'm focused on writing and teaching.
Hmm.
You can find me, I'm pretty easy to find. You can find me on my website, thetarotlady.com. And I'm all over social media, as always, usually at the Tarot Lady, except on TikTok, because someone grabbed the handle, so I have to be like the Tarot Lady official over there. But other than that, you can, in general, you can tell which one's me, which one's, I like to say, the real Slim Shady, the real Tarot Lady.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot. I've noticed like with the tarot people that I follow, there's a lot of like scammer tarot accounts out there because I follow you, I follow like Stephanie Capone, Meg Wall, and a few other ones. And like every once in a while, I'll see that they followed me, but I'm like, I know like Meg already or Stephanie already follows me. I'm like, that's weird. And so then I'll go look, and they have all of their pictures on their account, but it's not them. They're trying to get money.
Yeah, and one thing that I've learned is this is one of the reasons why I don't follow many people any longer,
Mhm.
because they will go to your list and try to find out who you're following, and then they hit those people up. So
Yeah.
some people think that's me being stuck up, and I'm like, no, I'm trying to make it so these scammers don't bother you, and that's really taken my problems down to almost minimal. I mean, it sounds weird and counterintuitive, but they're looking at your list, and they're looking to scam. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of scammers on the internet, unfortunately. I mean, you can find them not just in my industry, but the beauty industry.
Yeah.
I know some beauty bloggers have gotten scammed. It's really awful.
My grandma would say, "Get a job." That's what my grandma would say.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, imagine if they
Invest
took
your energy in something
yeah.
good is what she would say.
Well, imagine if they took the energy that they're doing to try to harm people
Right?
and actually put that into a real career.
Exactly. Exactly. Imagine if everyone did that, right?
Yeah.
Imagine, imagine. All right, so your book is so I don't even know, it's so heavy, but in like a really, really good way. And we have a lot of ground to cover. But before we kind of get into it, I was wondering if for a moment if you could speak to our listeners who maybe are a little bit hesitant about the topic of tarot. And I think that you'd be the perfect person to kind of speak into those questions or concerns because you address them so well in parts of your book and some of your other books as well. But honestly, like when I did my first tarot episode about a year ago, I think I had Brittany Muller on the show, and I've talked to Stephanie Capone, like I said, Meg Wall before, and I've had a few other tarot readers. I've done my own blog posts. I've attempted to do some like little tarot videos where I kind of talk about like my developing spiritual practice and things like that. And I've realized that people aren't too sure what to think of me because I think that they have some misconceptions, judging by the comments and messages I've gotten concerning what tarot is and what tarot is not. And so I was wondering if before we kind of dive into your book, if we can clear the air with some of those different things that people might be worried about.
Sure. Well, tarot, first of all, is 78 paper cards. Let's just start right there. And every one of those
It's not
cards,
78 demons. That's what I was
no,
told.
not at all. They're paper cards. I mean, they are nothing more than that. And they have images that are, archetypal images of
Hmm.
our journey here
Yeah.
on the planet and also our day to day activities. And anybody can look at those cards like a picture book and they can kind of get a feel for what that's trying to say.
Yeah.
And how tarot works as a reader comes up with a question, or a querent. Querent is the person who's getting the reading. We shuffle the cards and then we lay them out in patterns called spreads and look at the story that's unfolding. And the whole goal for readings is to help you see where you are right now and where you're heading, and maybe if there's a better path.
Mm,
It could also be a tool for looking within and unraveling all those knots that we all have tied up inside ourselves. Much as like those ink blots. I mean, everybody's heard of those. Ink blots help to tap into different parts of our psyche. Well, tarot does that too. And it can tell you, okay, well, right now things feel heavy. This is what you need to know. These are things you can do. So it really is a tool for guidance
mm,
and it is a tool for making better decisions. That's it in a nutshell. And unfortunately, because of popular media, some people are under the assumption that there's something sinister about it.
mm,
And there is absolutely nothing sinister about tarot. Tarot is simply 78 cards,
mm.
paper cards. And like any tool, it's all in the intent of the user. Now, anything can be used for good or ill. I mean, anything.
Yeah.
It's really up to you. So if you're looking to help yourself, to get guidance, to look within, to try to figure things out, tarot's wonderful. But if you're looking for it for something else, I'm sure you can find something negative to do with it. And I like to refer to it like a hammer. A
Mm,
hammer can be used to hang up a beautiful picture. It could also be used to smash a window in.
mhm.
What are you intending to do with this? But in a nutshell, it's on its own, it's very, very neutral.
I love what you said about because like a lot of our listeners are familiar with the Bible and the Bible stories. And I noticed even just like after using them for a few months, so many parallels between the image I would see on the card and what my spirit or whatever inside would think would kind of draw these different parallels to scripture verses or stories in the Bible that I was super familiar with because of the archetype. Like you said, that particular story maybe in the Bible is so wired into humanity, and it's the same kind of story that's in the card. And so what I've started in the last like 2 months, I'm doing this series for my Patreon supporters called Lectaro Divina, because when I
Mm,
was in seminary, we did Lectio Divina, which was taking a scripture passage and sitting with it, meditating with it, and seeing what the Spirit might evoke in us in terms of how that particular passage applies to our lives. And so I've been doing the same thing with tarot, but then drawing parallels in my different posts for my supporters about how the card coincide with a particular passage of scripture and tying it all together. And it's so interesting to me because it's like I look at it, I'm like, ah yes, like I've read that before in the Bible, and I'll go find it in there and it's there. And it's just so interesting that all these parallels exist. And for me, that helped me drop my guard a lot because I was nervous about tarot in the beginning because of everything I was told and taught about it. But doing that on a regular basis has really helped me, better get a better
Mm.
feel for it.
There's so many misconceptions about tarot.
Mhm.
And one of the misconceptions is that there is something, again, sinister or inherently evil about it. And like, that's not true.
Yep.
I grew up in a very religious household too. We grew up Catholic.
Mhm.
And, my parents were really into church. We went to church, every week, every holiday. Catechism, we called it CCD back in the day. I even taught CCD, by the way.
Mm,
So I grew up in a very, very religious background. But the one thing is, my mother was very psychic and
mm.
my family was very superstitious. So there was never anything weird when I picked up a tarot deck. They didn't care. They were just like, yeah, whatever.
Right.
They thought of it like it was nothing. They were more concerned about the rock albums I was listening to. They were
Right.
busy. They were busy
What do the
burning my
lyrics
punk.
say,
Yeah, they're
right?
burning my punk rock albums,
Right.
but they didn't care about that because intuition was honored in our house, and they just thought
Yeah,
whatever. So
yeah,
I didn't have. I was fortunate that I didn't grow up with any fear attached to it.
yeah.
And I only encountered that when I started reading professionally. Occasionally, I would come across somebody and they'd be like, "Oh, no, no, I can't touch that. That's evil." I'm like, what are you talking about? This is
Yeah,
actually going to help you. It's not evil.
yeah,
But that's again, it's because this is how it's portrayed in the public eye, and some religions, unfortunately, also tend to look at anything that's connected with divination as something that is bad, and it's not.
that's really good. All right, well, I hope that helps some of our listeners kind of drop their guard a little bit, because this tarot book that you wrote, this particular one, is not. We talked about this before we hit record. It's not like your typical tarot book, right? Because you have typical tarot book things in there, where there's descriptions of the cards, there's some how tos in terms of starting a tarot practice, like you touch on those different kind of things, but you talk all about it through the lens of life and death and grief and loss and these seasons of change. And so maybe I was wondering if you could maybe begin taking us into the book by talking to us about how tarot has been your companion through those kinds of times in your life, and maybe give us a snapshot view of how your tarot practice has even evolved and changed as a result of those times, and then fueled you to the point where you wrote this book to help people who maybe find themselves in similar kinds of places.
Well, when I first started reading tarot, I was a teenager. And
Mm.
of course, what were we reading for then? Silly stuff, like about dudes and does this guy like me, like that kind of
Is he
stuff.
gonna
Because,
ask me out, right?
yeah, is he going to ask me out?
Yeah.
I mean, that was like the stuff I started with, the really
Yeah.
like mundane things. But as I began working with tarot more, I could see that, again, it wasn't just for that kind of nonsense.
Mhm.
A lot of times it was really helpful. It gave me depth, it gave me some direction.
Mm.
So throughout my life, it's always been helpful in that regard. And when I started reading for the public, what a lot of people assume is that when people come to a tarot reader, that they're going to come there to ask about, will that guy ask me out? And sometimes there are people who come and they want to talk about love or money. Those are very common topics. But oftentimes, what I found at my tarot tables, people came in with the heavy stuff, the really heavy things. They came when they had a problem.
Yeah.
And so I would have people come in. I just found out I was ill. I've been diagnosed with this life threatening illness, or my mother's dying, or,
Mm.
I've gone through this situation, that situation. So a lot of my work for my clients really started centering around that. Let's get through the hard stuff together. Let's do this.
Mm.
And by that same token, as my life went on and as I got older and I'm nearing retirement in a few years, well, suddenly when you start getting on this planet for a little bit longer, you start dealing with some hard stuff too.
Mhm.
You start dealing with loss and grief, and you're going to go through things. Everybody's going to go through things. And I found myself turning to tarot during those times to sort out myself,
Mm.
because sometimes I would be feeling just negative or depressed or really uncertain about where things were going. And tarot really served as kind of a compass. It
Mm.
helped me to know that you're going to get through this. Here's things you can do for yourself. So my practice evolved from just looking for, am I going to get asked out, to really trying to solve issues and to work through my feelings, because feelings can be very complicated. But if we don't deal with our feelings, that's not good.
Mm.
Feelings are healing is one of the things I always say. So
Mhm.
it really allowed me to get in touch with all those deeper aspects, all those big, big inner things that needed to get worked on. And the same thing with my clients. I
Mm.
mean, I've helped my clients through some really heavy, heavy things. And I'm just really grateful that I've been able to be there on the journey with them. And tarot's been, again, super helpful for that.
Yeah. So when you come to the cards in these seasons of your life, like what are some examples of questions maybe that you brought to the cards? Because you have a section in the book where you encourage people to steer away from like the yes or no kinds of questions, or maybe even like the prediction kind of questions. And you have like a specific way to frame those questions. So like for you in your life, like in your season of grief that you describe in the book, like what types of questions were you bringing to the cards in that time?
That's a great question about questions. Yes and no questions are very helpful because sometimes things don't have a black and white answer.
Hmm.
Another question that's not helpful is to ask something like, will I? Saying will I, you're assuming that you have no say in the matter. And you're looking to them for a straight up you're looking for a straight up prediction or a guarantee on something.
Hmm.
And that's not the way life works either. I found that it's better to ask something like this. Let's say the question is, I am dealing with the grief of my ailing cat, which is something I'm dealing with right now. I've got a cat that's old, he's sick, he's diabetic, we're giving him shots, it's very complicated.
Mm,
So instead of saying something like, you know, will my cat be okay? I could ask, what do I need to know to bring my cat comfort at this time?
mm,
Now, when you're asking, what do I need to know? You might still get an idea of where things are going, but you're going to get helpful information. So I can be present, which is the key ultimately with life is being present. So many of us hang out in the past or we're worried about the future. Present moment is all that matters.
mm,
And so now I know at the present moment, okay, I have an idea what I can do for this cat.
mm.
And now let's hope that that steers it in the right direction.
Yeah.
Another good thing to ask is, what do I need to know about? Like, what do I need to know about my cat right now? That might give me some information about how the cat's doing, how the cat's feeling, what the cat needs from me. And again, this may seem like kind of a weird example, but animals are very important to animal lovers.
Yeah.
They're like part of the family. So
Yeah.
I've done many, many readings about animals over the years. That would be a great example of how to ask the right question.
So I think like in hearing that, I think like some of our listeners might be wondering, like when you pose the question, who are you posing the question to? Like in your mind, are you posing it to this deck of cards that's in front of you? Are you posing it to God if you believe in God? Are you posing it to the universe if it's the universe that you believe in? Like what when you or when other people ask the question, who are they directing that question to?
Well, first of all, you are directing it to the cards.
Hmm.
But again, the cards are a tool. What are they
Yeah.
doing? They're helping you to access your own inner wisdom, which is God given.
Hmm.
We all have that. Whether you're using the word God, universe, whatever, I tend to look at it as all kind of the same.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's a tool. It accesses your inner wisdom, which is part of the universal thing, and is giving you an opportunity to tap into that. So many people think that they have to look outside of themselves for answers. So they'll come
Yeah.
to something like tarot, but tarot is it's tricking you because it's forcing you to look within. And that's where all the answers are. One of the things that I remember growing up Catholic is the statement, the kingdom is within you. And that's really, really true. But I think we tend to like misinterpret that. We have all the information, all the wisdom we need right within ourselves. We just
Right.
have to go there.
Yeah, that's right. I've been really into the some of the Gnostic scriptures lately, and there's the Gospel of Thomas, which isn't Gnostic, but it's whatever. But anyway, in this particular saying, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God is both within you and it's without you. And I feel like that's something that the cards have really been helpful for me to see, is because, like you said, I've seen answers to different things. I've seen perspective to things that were inside of me that I didn't see before, but it's also helped open my eyes to things around me that I didn't notice before either that were going on in my life, because I might pull a card, meditate on it, think about it, and then I'll see something about a particular situation. I'm like, aha, like it's been there the whole time.
Mhm.
Right?
So many
Yeah.
things that are right under our nose, but we don't pay attention. One of the things I say is oftentimes we get to a point in our life and we're like, well, how did I get here? It's like that Talking Head song. How
Right.
did I get here? And when you start asking that question
Mhm.
and start looking back at the decisions you've made, and the things sometimes we make these decisions, we're not even doing any kind of deep thinking about how it might impact our lives or how it might impact the next 10 minutes, the next 10 months, the next 10 years, or other people. We
Yeah.
don't think about that. And then 10 years later, it's like, whoa, what was I you weren't thinking? And again, when we talk about this whole present moment thing, when we are fully present with our feelings, with our circumstances, when we are here in the moment, we're going to be more likely to make decisions that may or may not turn out to be the best thing, but it's going to be right for us. We
That's
want
right.
to make sure that we are not asleep at the wheel. The
Yeah.
more aware and awake we are, the more conscious we are, the better our lives will be. And tarot, again, we could say it's a tool for consciousness.
Do you mind if I share a piece of my story with you? And
Yeah,
maybe
go ahead.
maybe it might have a there might be a question here somewhere, or there might not be. Maybe you'll just respond to it. I don't really know. But um, I told you before about my father had passed away, and I grew up before I get into that. I grew up in in the evangelical world, right? So very conservative, very fundamentalist. It's our way or the highway kind of thing. And I heard about tarot cards growing up, and even in college and seminary. But we were taught that they were like nothing more than these entry points for demons to get into my life. And so, like the good Christian that I was, I steered clear of all of that for about 40 years of my life. Now I've obviously evolved, a bit past that. But even so, when I got my first tarot deck about a year ago, like I mentioned earlier, I was like super nervous. Like that Christian soldier inside was like, you're going to hell. All the different things that you were taught are about to come true. But even so, like I opened up the deck, I got some different books, and I found it all very helpful. And like I said earlier, like I fell in love with them because I saw these different parallels on the images of the cards to these images in the Bible that I grew up with in private Christian school and Bible college and seminary and things like that. There's so many parallels. But back in March, my father passed away, and that sent me into this place of grief that I just never really experienced before. So your book has been extremely helpful, like really resonating with me. But I had grown up in the church, and like I said before we hit record, I felt like I was just taught all my life to put my own feelings aside and I put my own grief aside. Everybody else is much more important than me. You have a church that has to keep going. You have sermons you have to keep preaching. You have Bible says you got to keep doing. People are relying on you, and so you got to stuff it all away. And this time, like when my father passed away, I remember I was driving home from the hospital and I said, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't even know what it means to grieve. Like, I couldn't remember the last time I really had a good cry because I just literally stuff everything away to be there for everybody else. And so I had been using tarot for about 6 months prior to that. And was using various decks. And so I decided to really integrate that into my practice of grief and really trying to access these different kind of feelings. And so again, your book has been very timely. But I feel like I've been able to use the cards to hear to hear from God, to hear from the divine, like in times when I feel like I'm not really hearing from God in places I normally would, like whether it's through my Bible or whether it's through prayer, whatever. I feel like the cards have, like we said earlier, like shown me something that's there. I just haven't been able to see it, maybe because it's been covered up by my own grief or whatever. I feel like I've been able to hear from my inner self, and I feel like even in a way, like I've been able to hear from my dad in a way because sometimes like I'll use the cards and I'll ask the cards a question. I feel like I'm asking my dad a question. I don't really know what I'm asking, but I'm asking somebody a question. I feel like there's a connection there between me and my dad and his soul. And so I guess if I had to formulate all of that into a question, it would be like in various seasons of life, like what advice would you have for best practices? Like, do you use the cards differently in the season of like joy and happiness when things feel like they're going really well? And then do you use it differently when a season of grief comes? Like, is it possible to use them to connect with the soul of a family member? Like, I feel like there's a lot there to discuss. I don't know where you want to begin, but that's my story, and I'll let you take us down down the rabbit hole.
We can go down millions of rabbit holes here. When I
Yeah.
grew up, my parents, again, we talked earlier before that they never really had an issue with anything with tarot.
Hmm.
They were more concerned with the music I was listening to because they thought that was a gateway into something
I was
really
taught that
bad.
too.
Yes.
Right.
And it's like, why do they think gateway? Everything's a gateway. With my children,
AC/DC,
oh,
right?
yeah, yeah. And with my kids, I was like, "Yeah, listen to whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah." And my kids are the bigged goody two shoes on the planet because they did have that kind of fear put into them.
Mhm.
It's funny because my son listens to jazz. He doesn't listen to any of the crazy stuff I was listening to back in the day. So anyhow, I just had to put that in there. We lead with so much fear about stuff,
Yeah.
and I think that doesn't help anybody at all to process any situation.
Yeah.
And I also grew up in a household. My father was, 100% German and very German. He was born 1915. He was 50 when I was born. So you were not supposed to have an attitude. You were not supposed to cry. I was a crybaby because I was
Yeah.
very sensitive.
Yeah.
And so I was told, you got to manage your temper. You can't do this. You can't do that. You got to be strong. You got to take care of your mom. Your mom's sick. You got to
Mhm.
take care of your siblings. You're the eldest daughter. And so I was also taught I got to stuff those feelings.
Mm.
And I'm meanwhile in this house of extroverts who are loud. And I just wanted to be quiet so I could figure out what was going on inside of myself.
Yeah.
So very early on, also, I learned I had to stuff things.
Mm.
Couldn't talk about it. There was going to be shame about that. And shame is also shame and fear. Everybody needs to get those shame, blame, and fear. Those are three very, very harmful things that do not serve any purpose except to make people not deal with things.
Mm.
And so, what ended up happening then, as I got older and really started seeing how that stuff would come out inappropriately, because that's what happens when you stuff something. Suddenly you have anger. And now I tend to be more of an anger person than a sad person,
Mhm.
but I would have all this pent up anger and resentment. It would come out at the worst times because I wasn't dealing with it. Wasn't dealing with it. And when I started working with tarot and doing all kinds of other things to start dealing with that anger, number one, I started feeling a lot better.
Mm.
And I felt like my life became more honest
Mm.
and I was able to process things faster and better. Doesn't mean it was always perfect. Feelings are always messy, but I was able to process it differently and better. Stuffing is not good.
Mm.
Again, feelings are healing. It's better to have those feelings that are negative and express them somewhere that's safe rather than stuffing inside because it comes out again at the worst times.
Yeah.
Or I really feel also when you don't process those feelings, oftentimes the universe is going to find a way to get you to pay attention to them. So it's better for us to deal with it and to remember that it's human to have these feelings. It's part
Yeah.
of the human experience to experience loss and grief and caregiving and anger and resentment and all of that stuff. It's human. It's what makes us real. So
Yeah.
tarot really taught me a lot about that. And one of the things I'm going to tell you is when my life is joyful and everything's peachy keen, I hardly ever reach for my cards.
Mm.
I don't think about it. As soon as something is hitting the fan, first thing I'm doing is going to those cards. Now this year, I'm not going to go into the details.
Sure.
Has been a very hard year,
Mm.
and it's kind of ironic. After I wrote the book, 2023 has been very, very tough. I have a situation going on. I have a few situations going on at once, but there's one in particular that's been incredibly hard. Something I never thought I'd be dealing with, and I have never done so many tarot readings in my life
Mm.
as I've done this last year.
Mm.
And I just had to like part of me kind of laugh. It's like maybe you writing that book kind of open up this possibility. But
Right.
it's been I gotta tell you, um, Glenn, this has just been a doozy of a year. And
Mm.
I know that there's an end in sight to the situation I'm dealing with. And tarot, as much as this sounds weird, it's been keeping me sane. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's showing me what I'm dealing with here. It's showing me my emotional thing, what I need to take care of myself right now, how I need to handle this situation. It's showing me the light at the end of the tunnel. It's keeping me going.
Mm.
So when something is rough, let me tell you, I'm going to consult those cards. When my life is going hunky dory, that's the last thing I'm thinking about. I'm throwing on some David Bowie. I'm eating cookies. I'm not worrying about anything.
Yeah.
But as soon as I worry,
Mm.
that's when they come out. And this year has really been the year where I've never done so many tarot readings in my life as this
Yeah.
year.
Has that always been the case for you? Like, have you always gone to the cards when life has thrown the curveballs? Was there ever a
Of
time when it
course.
was like even in the happy times when you would use the card? Like, is that been a shift for you, or has that been like always the case?
Well, I always get a yearly reading. I tend to go with astrologers instead of tarot
Mhm.
readers because here's the thing, you can read your own cards. I love reading my own cards, and I can read my own cards really well. And I like getting another consultation because I want to see what someone else has to say. And so once or twice a year, I get an astrology reading. If I get a tarot reading, tarot readers are always intimidated to read for me. They're thinking I'm going to grade them. So I'll go to an astrologer. Even though I
Right.
wrote books on astrology, no astrologer ever is like that with me. And so I'll get a reading like once or twice a year.
Mm,
The two readers I generally go with are Sam Reynolds and Anne Orderly. They're great, by the way, if anyone's listening. Fabulous. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I'll get a reading from Mecca Woods, who is another amazing astrologer.
mm,
So I've got a couple of my key astrologer people, and those I do not when there's an emergency. Those are just general life. I want to see what you see, what areas I can work on, where I can strengthen things. I get my
mm.
advice. But when I'm really worried, when I'm stressed, that's when the tarot comes out for me.
Yeah.
And I prefer to do my own.
Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I'm feeling like it's because I'm thinking about my own. Again, I'm like super new to it, but for me, like there are. I think before my dad passed away, I wasn't really using them as much. Like he had cancer, so their things were progressing downward fast. But even then, like I didn't really grab them as often. But now I feel like since he's passed away, I've been in this season of grief, and I feel like I'm all out of sorts. I feel like I reach
Yeah.
for them multiple times a day. Sometimes I'll do it in the
Yep.
morning. Sometimes I'll be like, today just was horrible. So I do it again like at night, and just try to get like that added perspective. And what I'm really finding interesting is that I will pull the same card multiple times, which is
That
really it's
happens.
almost like freaky to me because like I'll pull one day it was like the same card for 3 days in a row. I'm like, what are the chances of this? Because there's 78 cards. I shuffled them really good, and I'm pulling them a completely random, and it's the same card multiple times in a week.
The tarot's trying to get your attention when that happens.
Yeah.
And by the way, one of the things that I found really helpful when people pass on is I have a book that in the book I have a mediumship reading I do.
Hmm.
Now, I don't consider myself a medium. My friend John Edward is a medium. He's amazing. He can see, spirit around you. Some people have that gift. I don't. I have had loved ones and I've had clients, loved ones visit me in my dreams. So
Hmm.
when I'm in my sleeping state, that's when I can have these very profound messages coming from the other side. Now, I know some people don't believe in an afterlife. Listen, I'm open-minded because I'm open-minded to almost anything. And but I developed a tarot spread
Mm,
many years ago to just get some messages from the other side because one thing that I found when we are dealing with the grieving process, part of it's because we wish we had more time
mm,
to speak or one last chance to hear what our loved ones have to say, or we want to know what's going on with them. And I'm
yeah.
a nosy person. I want to know what's going on. And so I developed that reading and been using it for a long time. And it's always brought incredible comfort to my clients
Mm,
because, first of all, nobody has ever turned down a mediumship reading. They're always like, oh my God, yes. Can you do that? I'm like, with tarot, we can
mm,
get some messages for you and it might help you.
mm,
And I know it's helped me. One time I just taught a class on tarot for mediumship, and I actually put this spread in the book too. I decided to do a reading on my dad, and I've had plenty of visits from him. And my father, I always laugh because my father was a farmer, and he lived in farm clothes, work clothes, and worked in a foundry and had foundry clothes. That's what you saw my dad in. But every time he's visited me in my dreams, he's dressed to the nines with a fedora, a fancy cane, and all that. And I always laugh and I'm like, Dad is hanging out with Halston on the other side because this is not the way he was in real life. But I did this spread because one day I was curious. I thought, oh, let's see what Dad's up to. And when I did the spread, it just kind of blew me away so much that I took a picture of it, I wrote it down, I kept that spread, I use it as the example in the book. The final card of that reading is the Queen of Wands. Now, the
mm,
Queen of Wands represents a fiery person who identifies as female. It could be a Leo, Sagittarius, or Aries. Well, my mother had passed away about 4 years before my father died. And
mm,
my father never got over it. I mean, he grieved hard. My mother and father were like best friends. So
mm,
it was very, very hard for him. And so when he passed and I did that reading, it was like the universe was letting me know he was with her. And it was the final card, it's the focal point. And just getting to her was his goal. And
mm,
so it was really, really helpful. And I just thought, well, these two lovebirds are united. and he couldn't be happier getting out of here to be with her.
Yeah.
Super profound. I
Yeah.
needed that message.
So how do you go about like, because thinking about, you talking about pulling cards, talking about getting these messages. How does somebody go about developing their intuition in terms of reading these cards? Because like in the tradition I grew up in, there's a verse in the Bible that says your heart is deceitful, is wicked, above all things. And that was always the message was, those inner voices, the inner stuff, you want to ignore that because you need to look for your guidance from the church. You need to look for your guidance from your pastor, from your Bible, from God. You never really go in, you got to go outside. And so that was one of the biggest things I had trouble with when I first got my cards. Everybody's talking about intuition and listening to the inner voice.
Mhm.
Again, that Christian soldier was like, "No, you can't listen to that voice." And so somebody now who's like trying to get past that, and maybe they got their first deck of cards and they're trying to develop that. We can obviously use books because your book, other books are very helpful in terms of the meaning of the cards. But I'm even finding that sometimes, like I'll pull a card and it will say something to me that is maybe even almost the opposite of what I see in a book. But for whatever reason, there's something inside of me saying, no, this is what this card means for you in this moment right now. And so I'm becoming more comfortable in listening to that. But maybe somebody who's trying to develop, loosen their grip on all the other things they've been told to listen to and trying to really embrace that inner voice. Like, what advice would you have for them?
First of all, we all have intuition. Every one of us has it.
Mhm.
It is an instinct that's within us and it's to protect us. And if we do not listen to our intuition, it's going to get us in a lot of trouble. And one of the things I would urge your listeners to do is buy one book. It's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. Now,
Mm,
Gavin de Becker is a famous, like, I think he's a detective, whatever. He's actually the guy that helped Jeff Bezos figure out who leaked the photos of him and his partner.
mm,
So he's very, very interesting guy. But the book talks about how our intuition saves our lives and how we are taught to ignore it and be nice. And being nice gets us in a lot of trouble.
yep.
And one thing I will say is my intuition has saved my life on multiple occasions. I never ignore it. If I get a funny feeling, I'm like, I'm going with that immediately. Now,
Mm,
one of the things that I will say also is, growing up with farm folks, my parents were eighth grade educated. And when you are coming from that kind of a background, they did not have like the knowledge, the wisdom, or the skills in many things that, other people who are better educated might have. So they had to go by their gut.
sure.
Sometimes I would even wonder, how did these two even make it in the world? Well, they were intuitive. They went by their intuition. If something didn't feel right, if mom had a funny feeling,
Mm,
we listened to that. We honored that. And so a lot of times when people don't have like lived experience like a child, or if they don't have like, some kind of an academic thing or a belief system that gets in the way, um, they're just going with their instincts.
mm,
And instincts will tell you a lot. Babies follow instincts, animals follow instincts, and people who develop their intuition, what happens is when they have that connection, you're making far better decisions.
mm,
You're making far better decisions. And I'm going to say this about intuition. If God didn't want you to feel things like intuition, you wouldn't have that ability. Why would you stuff that? Why would
mm,
you ignore that? Again, it's saved my life.
mm,
And so how we can develop an intuition is very simple. Listen, pay attention.
yeah.
Pay attention to what you're feeling at any given moment. What am I sensing here?
Mm,
And if you feel like, okay, I don't want to do that, just write it down and then come back to your situation later and look at what your initial response was, because right there it is giving you feedback. It's the same with tarot. You pull out a tarot card for a child. Okay, let's say I'll just grab a random card here. So if you pull out a card for a child, let's get one that's really like, here's a card, the Six of Pentacles.
mhm,
A child will see that and they see beggars. They don't need to know anything about intuition. They see it, they get the image, and maybe they're going to tell me something about a beggar that they met, or an unhoused person that they were helping out through a food bank that they were involved with their parents or their church. Right away it's opening up the story. They're going with their first instinct. Sometimes I'll look at a card like the Four of Pentacles, and
mm,
instead of seeing like a miser, which is a traditional thing, I might look at this as, you need to protect yourself right now.
Mm.
I just go with what I feel.
Mm.
Even by the way, I believe in learning the traditional meanings, but your intuition will always trump that.
Yeah.
So these are ways you can develop it, but the most important thing is you just got to listen. And
Yeah.
again, if you every time I go against my intuition, and I'm going to say this, and a lot of other people will probably agree, I regret it.
Yep.
I always regret it. I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. I should have like taken the other route. I should have booked another day. I always, always regret it. So I
Mm.
don't ignore it.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah. There's a one of the most memorable cards for me that I've pulled in the last 6 months since my dad passed away was a card that the meaning of the card in the books was like entirely different than the meaning that I felt inside. And I don't remember which card it is, so you can tell me, but the picture is a guy who's like taking these swords from people. He's
Five of Swords.
Yeah, and like I guess the meaning, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the meaning traditionally is something about like stealing or taking or things like that. But for me, when I was looking at the card, I'm like, this doesn't resonate with me. And I just sat there and I stared at it, and I felt like this voice inside say, "You're just carrying everybody else's swords. Like you're carrying
Yes.
everybody else's stuff, and you've been taught all your life to harbor every push all your stuff away so you can carry everybody else's things, but who's carrying your stuff, and I felt like the
Yeah.
voice said, put down the swords and just feel your own stuff. And for me, like, that really resonated with me in that moment, even though like I couldn't find that in any of the books, but I wrote it in my journal. I'm like, well, this is what this means for me today, and I'm going to sit with it. And for me, that was like hugely impactful in this process of
Mhm.
grief, because I just felt that real sense of freedom and that real sense that it's okay to not feel like you have to take care of everybody else in this moment that you're in.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's a beautiful interpretation.
Mm.
And I love that. Again, the cards, they're universal archetypes. You look
Yeah.
at it like a picture book, you're going
Yep.
to get your story written in there.
Yep.
You're going to see your story unfolding. And sometimes also, I'll do a reading for myself and won't make a lick of sense.
Mm.
And I'll think, why did I get that card?
Right.
Why that? And then later on, I'm like, oh my God. And I
Yep.
pulled the card this morning too. And they were really funky cards. And I'm like, what the heck could that? I forgot about it. And right before I got on this call with you, a loved one texted me that about a situation. I'm like, oh,
Ah.
it wasn't for me. That
Yep.
message was for them. And now I'm going to be helping them through that situation.
That's right. That's right. It's so cool how that works. And
Hmm.
so cool. It's almost like you pull a card in the morning and it makes no sense to you until you have the context for it later on in the day, right?
Yes.
Like, aha, that's what that means.
That is one of actually a really great way to practice tarot, but also intuition. In
Yeah.
the morning, I mean, Julia Cameron writes about morning pages for writers. I think that's really brilliant, but you could do that with tarot. Get up
Yeah.
in the morning, pull a card, just jot down a couple of thoughts. I always pull a card every day. I've been doing that, for over 40 years. And then later on, come back at the end of the day. What did that mean?
Mm.
How did that show up? Did it not show up at all? If not, why? And remain curious and just jot down your later reflections. Now, I'm a big fan of journaling. I love to journal. That's one of my other favorite things to do.
Mm.
It really works for developing your intuition and developing tarot. I also have a dream journal too, which I haven't written in a while because I wasn't dreaming really good, but I started dreaming better.
Mm.
So I recommend writing all these things down. Actually, my publisher, Wiser, we created a Wiser Tarot journal together. That is the ideal tarot journal, but it has a space for later reflection. And later reflection is often when those aha moments
Mm.
happen.
All right, we're getting short on time, but before we're done, would you mind pulling a tarot card for our listeners or for myself, whatever, however we want to do it, and just give us and speak to us something from your own
Yeah,
intuition.
we're going to pull one card for you and one for your listeners.
Okay.
So let's do that. By the way, I always shuffle the cards up, then I put them face down. I cut them into three piles, and that's just my method. I always use the left hand. Why? Because I'm a left-handed person, number one, and number two, the left hand is closest to your heart, and therefore the message
Hmm.
comes from your heart. So first of all, for you, we have the Knight of Wands. You are about to go on an amazing journey. This is going to be a journey that takes you to places you've never gone before. So, one thing you want to do is remain curious, remain open to the experiences, and go forward and be brave and bold. You never know what you're going to discover about life or yourself.
Mm,
Knight of Wands for you.
mm.
Now, what do we got for your listeners? Whoops, try not to drop these things. We have the Ten of Swords. Ten of Swords is reversed. And
Mhm.
by the way, I read reversals. A lot of readers don't. Please don't feel that you have to read reversals. You can choose to ignore it. But I find reversals give us 78 different, more additional meanings. And I'm a Gemini. We always love as many different things
Many
as we can
angles as you
get.
can get.
Yes. And when the Ten of Swords is reversed, it symbolizes like we're letting go of something,
Mm,
we're releasing something. So I would say for your listeners, whatever's been pinning you down, you're now ready to let that go.
mm,
And as you let that stuff go, you're going to feel so much lighter and brighter, and you're going to be able to move in much different ways. So don't fear letting go.
mm,
It's happening naturally, anyways.
mm,
You're getting lighter.
mm.
So that is the message.
Wow. Well, Teresa, I could talk to you all day. I could book you for the next 3 hours. We could have a much longer conversation. But thank you so much for taking time for me, for listeners. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenn. It has been a joy. And yes, I could talk for 3 more hours. We got plenty to say.
Definitely. And real quick, where can people go to connect with you online? What are the best places?
The absolute best place is my website,
Mhm.
thetarotlady.com. That's where everything is happening. I've also got a Patreon where I do teaching and have daily card of the day, daily forecast for folks. So those are two really excellent ways to connect with me. And of course, you can find me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Threads and all of that. But I'm mostly active on Instagram. So check me out there. And the
Awesome.
handle is the Tarot Lady.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes and we'll do it again soon.
Thank you.